You're listening to episode 84 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. This week's show is all about authentic and healthy Indian cooking. Indian food has always been a bit of a mystery to me, but my guest today explains the diverse and delicious cuisine of India in an easy and really understandable way. My guest is Madhu Gadia. She's a leading authority on Indian cooking, and she's the author of The Indian Vegan Kitchen. She's also the voice behind the must-visit website, cuisineofindia.com. And I encourage all of you to hop on over to Madhu's website after the podcast so you can check out her cooking videos, and she is just such a delight, her blog posts, and all of her recipes. It's kind of like your one-stop shop for Indian cooking. Madhu is a mother of two. She's a grandmother, and she's also a fellow registered dietitian. On the show, you're going to hear about her life around the kitchen table as a child in India, her favorite family recipes, and you're going to need some chickpeas for that. And also, you're going to learn about how you can set up a nourishing Indian pantry in no time. It's so easy. She's going to give you the 6 spices that you're going to need in order to make traditional Indian dishes. And P.S., curry powder is not on that list. And of course, we're going to talk about the recipes in her cookbook, The Indian Vegan Kitchen. Now, we recorded this podcast back in August. I really thought I was getting ahead of myself. Simon was still home. It was super busy this summer. But alas, it is now October, and I don't know what took me so long, but I'm just so excited to have Madhu on the show. Time just keeps flying by. Can you guys relate to that? Okay, a few friendly reminders. If you love the show, tell a friend about it, or post a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on lizshealthytable.com, and be sure to check out the show notes from today's show for all the recipes and the resources discussed. You can also follow me on Instagram at Liz Weiss. I've been spending a lot more time on Instagram these days, and I'm also doing a weekly Instagram Live with Roseanne Rust. She was just on episode 83, Roseanne Rust from @ChewTheFacts. And we do this weekly Instagram Live, which we're calling Nutrition in an Insta. This week, we're going to tackle pumpkin. But enough about me. I want you to get your turmeric, your ginger, and your cumin seeds ready, because we got to get cooking with Madhu. Hey, Madhu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on the show. You and I, just so my listeners know, we've been chatting all summer long. We've been playing around with Skype. You sent me your cookbook. I've been cooking. And I'm finally having you on the show. So I'm so excited. And I thought we could just start by having you tell everybody where in the world you live right now. And then we'll talk a little bit, just about your family and where you're from. So give us the Madhu story.
All right. Well, I live in Ames, Iowa, which is the home of Iowa State University. And I live here with my husband and 2 children. Well, children are grown and gone. And my husband is a professor at Iowa State University. And we've been here for many years.
And I think you might have worked at Better Homes and Gardens at one point, right?
I worked there for a couple years, and I was their technical editor for books like Diabetic Living, Heart Healthy Living, and they were just coming out with those books at that time. And a book that I don't know if they still have called Diet. And I was the editor of that magazine. And that's just about 40 minutes from my house. So it was great.
Wow. Yeah, Ames, Iowa. I think I was on a plane one time back in the day when we used to fly airplanes, and I met somebody who was, I think he had been like a professor or something there, and then maybe he moved somewhere else, economics or some such crazy topic that I could not relate to. Well, what does your husband teach there?
Computer science. He's a professor in a department of computer science. Yes.
Oh, okay. So he should meet my husband because my husband is a computer guy. He does software and all that good stuff. And he actually helps me with my website. Although, word to the wise, never ask your husband to help you with your website because we invariably have a huge fight over it. So maybe I should have hired somebody. I don't know, but computer guy.
All I can say is I agree. Yes. He's a computer guy. He's a book guy in the sense he loves books. And he used to talk all about how you should publish books and how they're published. So when I self-published my first book, he was supposed to help me and he did. But, oh man.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, you
Next
can
time
relate.
I said not again.
No. And so this is what I say to Tim. I say, Tim, I grocery shop. I make dinner. I spend hours doing this. And he's a pescatarian. What more can I do for you? I ask you to do one little thing on my website. It's like the world has come to an end.
Yes.
Okay.
Close enough.
We have that in common.
Yes, we do.
All right. Well, I'm sure people listening are probably like, yep, that's my life. I can relate.
Yes.
Oh, man.
It's actually good to talk to other women to say, okay, you're not alone.
Right. Oh, yeah,
yes.
it's driving me crazy. But, and you and I are both registered dietitians. We have that in common. And, so tell everybody, Madhu, where you're from, because you're from India originally. And, in this country, when we think about India, we just think India, but India is huge. And we're going to get into it deeper into the podcast, but the cuisine is so varied, just like in this country, Southern cuisine, different from cuisine of the Northwest, for example. So where in India are you from?
Well, I just want to give a little intro here in the sense I was born in India, in North India, and I grew up in North India. But then I came to USA when I did my 6th to 10th grade here because my dad was doing his PhD and he brought the whole family. And I feel like I'm very comfortable in both cultures because I was here in part of my formative years. And then we went back to India and I finished my high school and bachelor's there. So it's kind of like, I feel like I have my foot in 2 countries. Yes.
And when we talk about Northern India compared to the South, what would you say are some of the biggest differences between the cuisines of the North and the South? And I'm sure it really is based on what's grown. Like I think of India. When I think of Italy, I think of the North being more rice. I think of the South being more pasta. So what are some of those kind of big glaring differences between the North and the South? So
Indian cuisine, first of all, can be divided into 4 regions: North, South, East, and West. But I would say the primary difference is in the grain. So in the North and Northwest, you have wheat as the primary grain, and in South and East is more rice-based. So that determines, that's the staple food. And so that determines the cuisine and how it's spiced and how it's eaten.
And even things like, when we think in this country, you go out for Indian food and I always think of tandoori chicken, right? So immediately I think, you have to have this sort of tandoor oven or tandoori oven. But that's not the case too, right? I mean, just even the equipment, the techniques are different between different parts of India.
So tandoor is technically, it's an underground oven, okay? In the sense it's only in the state of Punjab and Haryana, which are the northern states, Delhi, and it's basically from that region that the tandoor comes. But it's known throughout the world because of the simple fact that all restaurants adapt tandoor as their source of making breads and tandoori chicken, etc. But it's primarily from that one region. So no, I do not own a tandoor. I don't know any friends of mine that own a tandoor. So recently I wrote a friend of mine in India. I'm like, you're the only person I've ever been to whose house I went to who had a tandoor in their backyard. And she said, oh, we don't have that anymore. It's very difficult because the tandoor is like 600 to 800 degree Fahrenheit. That's how hot it gets. And you stick your hand in it and slap the breads around the sides of the oven. And that's why they cook like within minutes and keep it crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. And no, people do not own tandoor, but you can use your oven to make tandoori breads and tandoori chicken and meats. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a very hot oven, and I will not be sticking my hand in there. Thank you very much.
No.
So I, as usual, am getting way ahead of myself because, there's still a lot that we need to unpack here at the beginning of the show before we really dig into the food. And that is, I wanted you to just tell everybody if you can remember when the two of us first met, because I feel like I've known you forever, but I can't in my mind remember the exact time we met, but you might. Maybe you have a better memory than me. Do you remember when we first met?
I actually was trying to think about that. But I'm going to say in 1997 is when I self-published my first book. Went to Fancy and, where we used to sell books. And somewhere between there and my next book, I kept going almost every year just to sell the books and to get introduced my cuisine and my books to the dietitians. And somewhere in the author meetings of the nutrition entrepreneurs is how we met.
Okay, that makes pretty good sense. And just for people listening, FNCE is the Food Nutrition Conference and Expo, which is our dietitian, annual professional conference, which this year will be going virtual, which I will be doing, but I'm bummed about it because obviously we want to meet in person. So Madhu and I go way back. We met many years ago, professionally, and we've just sort of kept up this little friendship. And then recently, a couple months ago, you shot me an email and we just got to chatting again. You've written, several cookbooks, which I talked about in the, in the opening to the show. And your latest is the Indian Vegan Cookbook, or the Indian Vegan Kitchen rather, which I've been cooking my way through. And so we're going to, sort of dig into that cookbook on the show today. So you had this passion, and your passion obviously is Indian food, Indian cuisine. And you've got a YouTube series and you do cooking videos, which are very helpful. So I think there's a lot of confusion about Indian food, Madhu. I think a lot of people, when they think of Indian food, they think of a particular spice called curry powder. But there's more to Indian cuisine than a dish made with curry powder, right? That's number one. Number two is when people sometimes are, talking about Indian cuisine, they might say, oh, I'm going to go out and order a curry. Well, ordering a curry, well, what does that mean? And my understanding, because I, of course, went to Wikipedia, is that a curry is a variety of dishes originating in the Indian subcontinent that uses a complex combination of spices or herbs, usually including turmeric, cumin, coriander, ginger, and fresh or dried chilies. And when I've been cooking from your book, and I've been making some of the curries in your book, they have been using these spices. And interestingly, none of those dishes that I've made from your book, none of those quote unquote curries, call for curry powder. So I think people get confused about that. So what is a curry powder? And when people say, oh, I don't really love Indian food because I don't like curry, it doesn't really make sense because curry powder does not define the cuisine.
Exactly. So curry powder, first of all, is a blend of spices. So the spices you just mentioned, turmeric, cumin, coriander, ginger, cayenne, are some of the primary spices in a curry powder. Now, the thing is, if you're going to use a curry powder, if to make your Indian curry, so to speak, you're going to get the same taste every time because it's the same spice. It's the same blend of spices. Yes. So it's an oversimplification of the cuisine as well as the spice spices used in Indian cuisine.
Yeah. All right. So I just want everyone to know, if you're making a curry, doesn't mean you're using curry powder. And so I have like all those spices we just mentioned, they're very basic spices, and I have all of them. I actually keep my ginger in the freezer. And when I need it, I just take it out and I use a microplane, and I just use that to kind of shred it up, if you will. And so I've been having a great time cooking out of your book. And so that's been a lot of fun. I've made several recipes, and one of them, and I'm going to sort of jump ahead, that I actually made just this morning is a recipe. Let me open it up here because I don't have the book in front of me. I took a picture of it. So I decided when I was going to cook out of your book, I was going to make some of your quote unquote curries, and they all have a sauce, and they're all sort of, yellowish in color, probably thanks to the turmeric. And just this morning, I made your creamy mushroom curry. I think it's on page 103. It's a veggie side dish. And it doesn't have any cream at all. And I thought I would just tell everybody what's in this recipe because it was really interesting. You call for sauteing up some onions with ginger and garlic and a green chili. And I did not have a green chili, so I just used just a little regular bell pepper, like those little mini bell peppers. So I kind of wimped out, in terms of the spice factor. And then there's almonds in there and cashews, and you sort of saute it up, and then you just kind of pop it into a food processor with a little bit of water, and you just pulverize it till it makes a paste. And then in the meantime, you saute up your mushrooms, and then you add this paste back in with it, along with turmeric and salt and a little bit of cayenne pepper, and then you just let it bubble and cook. And it's just this really yummy flavored side dish, and just such an interesting way to present mushrooms, you know what I mean? Instead of like, I always just saute mushrooms. But I really enjoyed this sauce, and I like that turmeric. I liked having the nuts in there. It was really interesting, and it was fun. And I will say that because I'm a little bit spicy, or a little bit wimpy rather, when it comes to spices, I kind of went light on the cayenne, but your palate's probably a little more adventurous than mine, Madhu.
So this is one of the other, first of all, I'm glad you enjoyed the creamy mushroom curry. And I want to just add to the fact that this says creamy mushroom curry, but we don't use any cream because it is a vegan book. And therefore, the creaminess of the dish is coming from the nuts. And as for the cayenne, this is one thing I like to, or the spiciness of Indian food, is the spiciness or the hotness, chilliness of the Indian cuisine primarily comes from cayenne pepper and green chilies. So if you don't like any of these, or you don't like can't eat very spicy food, you should, you can leave them out. It's not a big deal. When my kids were little, I used cayenne very sparingly or didn't use it. And then my husband and I would just keep a little bowl of like chili sauce on the side, which was made with cayenne. And we would just add it to the dish for ourselves. And because the kids loved the food, it just couldn't eat the spices. So it's very common to make it mild to hot, depending on what you like. But it's only the cayenne. So everything else is not hot, other than black pepper, of course. But you don't use that in extensive quantity, right?
Right. And you know what I noticed too? I made another one of your recipes, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And when I first tasted it, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of cayenne in there. And then that dish you had recommended, make it a few hours earlier, save it for later, let the flavors blend, and then, heat it up and have it later, which I did. And I had said to the family, I'm warning you, this is pretty spicy. And everyone was like, no, this is not spicy. So
that's good to know.
It mellowed out is what I'm saying. It mellowed out, which was nice. So for people listening who want to sort of start cooking more Indian cuisine, they want to get adventurous, they want to get your book because they're desperate to try the Indian Vegan Kitchen, which by the way is a phenomenal cookbook. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Such well-written recipes, and I'm a stickler for a well-written recipe, and you definitely know how to write a recipe, lady, let me tell you. But
thank you.
For people who want to start digging into Indian cuisine, what would you say are those starter spices, herbs and spices that they should have in the pantry? So which dried seasonings should people go to the store and say, okay, I'm going to get these 5 or 6 or 7 spices?
Okay. So 6 spices is what you need to make, I would say, 80% of the Indian cuisine, which is pretty awesome. So I have this spice box, and it only has the 6 main spices. One is turmeric and cumin seeds, ground coriander, and cayenne pepper, and garam masala, which, by the way, I will talk a little bit about it in a few seconds, and black mustard seeds. You don't want to use yellow mustard seeds in Indian cooking. You want to use the black one because they give a very smoky flavor to the dish. So those are the 6 spices you want to go get. And you are ready to make, like I said, hundreds of Indian dishes with just these 6 spices. Everything else is secondary.
I love that. I mean, how simple is that? And thank you very much. No curry on that list, i.e.
No
curry
curry.
powder, because we're getting away from that. I love these combinations. You said you were going to talk about garam masala. So can you tell us what it is?
Yes. So garam masala is, again, a blend of spices. So when you think of, or when Indians think of cooking, they're always thinking digestion, health, and, the Ayurvedic medicine or the Ayurveda, the alternative medicine. We've been cooking with that way for centuries. So when you say the word garam just means hot, translated. But it's not hot in terms of spicy hot or hot in terms of temperature hot. It just means heating to the body. So it has spices like cloves and ginger and cumin seeds and cardamom, and are just some of the 4 spices. But it has, my garam masala, which is recipes in the book, has 6 spices that I use. And it's all supposed to heating to the body. So you want to add a little bit of garam masala at the end of the dish. Not only it brings out the flavor, but it's also good for digestion and good for your health.
How interesting. Yeah. But simple. That's the other thing. So, you
just use garam masala. You don't think about all that.
Right. You don't think like, what went into that? So Madhu, you just gave us a list of spices to keep on hand in our Indian pantry. But what else would you recommend? So if we want to, tomorrow start cooking Indian recipes, what else would we need to have?
You want to, of course, have the basics, which is the onion, ginger, garlic, and majority of the people have those in their pantry. In addition, you want whole wheat flour, and if you want to make the Indian flatbreads, and basmati rice, which is a very typical Indian rice, and beans. And when it comes to beans, you can use the ones that you're familiar with, which is kidney beans and chickpeas, mung beans, and red lentils, as well as red lentils are split lentils as well as the brown lentils. So those are the ones you're familiar with. But if you want to really get into Indian cooking, you'd want to get some Indian beans, which is probably another 10 beans that are not as popular, but they're available in Indian grocery stores.
Wow. Yeah, we have a store near me called H Mart. And, at H Mart, they have like so many, it's amazing. You go in there and you're right. Like it's not just going in and there's like a can of black beans. I mean, it is just over the top in terms of variety. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, there's just so much amazing variety. It's incredible. So you've got your book, The Indian Vegan.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about beans because I can go on and on the kind of beans we have.
That's a separate show, Madhu. We're going to have to get you back on the show if we just want to do a show on Indian beans. So, beans obviously is a great protein source. And I know throughout the Indian vegan kitchen, you've got plenty of recipes with beans, chickpeas. You've got like a veggie burger, if you will, like with beans in it. So there's so many like great applications for using beans. But because I didn't ask you this at the beginning, you've got, your book, The Indian Vegan Kitchen. What are the other cookbooks that you've written?
So my first cookbook was called Light and Luscious Cuisine of India, in case any of your audience still has that book. And it came out in 1997, and I self-published that book. which I later sold it to Penguin Random House, and they renamed it as New Indian Home Cooking, which is, of course, all Indian cooking, including, chicken, including meat and fish, poultry. Yes. As dietitian, I always want to say meat already encompasses all those three. Yes.
And do you have a favorite recipe? So when you look at the Indian Vegan Kitchen, when we open the pages of that book, do you have a favorite recipe? Maybe that's an unfair question because there's 150 recipes in that book.
Yes. I'm going to focus on one that's called quick chickpea curry because it's something that is delicious. It's quick and it has all the flavor, and you use canned chickpeas. I also have a video on that on YouTube, and it has all the spices and all the flavor, and it's ready in literally 15 minutes. And the reason I picked that is when my kids were little and I would come late from work, I'd open a couple of cans of chickpeas and I'd have this delicious dish, and all of us would just eat it and we were happy.
So talk us through it. Do you have it in front of you? Can you talk us through and tell us what's in that recipe?
Yes. So you have 2 cans of chickpeas, which you drain, or you can get, if you want to cook the chickpeas, is 3 cups of cooked chickpeas. And you just saute onions in a little bit of oil, and you add, I forgot to talk about one spice called asafoetida. And asafoetida, we tend to put in almost all beans because asafoetida is a natural spice. You can eliminate that if you don't want to go get it or if you don't have it. It's also, if you look it up, it's also called a stinky spice. It's a resin of a tree, so it's natural, and it helps digest beans and cruciferous vegetables, and that's why we put it in. So again, it's optional, but if you're cooking the Ayurvedic way, the Indian way, asafoetida is something that we put in there. So I heat the oil, I put a little bit of asafoetida, cumin seeds, then I add my chopped onions, grated ginger, and I saute that till the onions are translucent to lightly brown. And then I add ginger, and I add 1.5 cups of chopped tomatoes or 1/2 cup of canned tomatoes. And then I add turmeric in the same thing. I'm just sauteing the spices. I'm just getting my so-called masala ready. And then I add the turmeric, ground coriander, cayenne to taste, and salt. Now my spice blend is ready. And you want to cook that until you get you want to keep sauteing it till you get the nice blend of spices. That's where they mellow out. Okay, and then you add your canned chickpeas to it and salt and water, and you simmer that for just about 10 minutes. And then you add garam masala. Again, I'm adding the garam masala at the end because you want that flavor to be more intense, and lemon juice, and garnish it with cilantro. You're ready to go. A cup of rice with it. Cook some rice with it. Yes.
That sounds good.
It is so good.
Wow. Gosh, something popped into my head when you were describing that, and then it just left me. So I'm sure it will come back to me. Oh, I know. When you talk about a masala, can you tell everybody what is that? A masala?
Oh, it's the most confusing word there is.
Oh, no. Don't confuse me. I just figured out the curry thing. Come on.
So technically, curry is a masala too. So masala among Indians just means, literal translation is spice. Okay, so masala, so we have a masala box, which just means a spice box. We have my dry masala here, sitting here, which just means dry spices. And then I just made a masala with onions, ginger, I didn't put garlic in this one, onion, ginger, and then I put dry spices in it. And I cooked it, and now that's an onion masala. So it's such a loose term. It's like you can call anything curry that's yellow, right? Although all dishes aren't yellow. But it's same way, masala is a dry blend, like garam masala, right? That's a masala. That's like blend of spices. And then you have So masala is definitely a very translated as spices, but not just dry spices.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, apologies.
I'm glad you asked.
But you really have, for me, simplified it, because when you just talk about like what you need in the pantry, those basic spices. So like when you were just describing that curry dish with the chickpeas, I'm thinking, wait a minute, I have 2 cans of chickpeas here. I've got rice. I could totally make that tonight, because I already have in my pantry those basic spices you told me to.
Great. See?
Yeah. So I think, already I'm like, I can do this. The other thing that I made that I haven't been making over the years is dal, D-A-L, dal. And that's another one of those very broad terms, because it's my understanding that dal just means beans. But when I make dal, I always have like lentils in it and vegetables and spices. And it's almost like a soup, if you will, right? So am I correct in that description?
So just like masala, just is like a conglomerate of dry, wet, Dal is the same way. Dal just actually means beans, like you said. And beans can be whole beans like chickpeas and lentils, or it can actually be, and we use a ton of split husked beans. So the example would be red lentils or pink lentils. So when you go buy them, they're just already husked, right? There's no husk in it, and it's split. Now they cook like that.
They cook quickly, right?
They cook quickly, and they fall apart. And that's okay, because you want it to be a soupy consistency. And so one of the things I think, like when I was talking about the quick chickpea curry, I want my curry/sauce to be a little thick. I don't want it to be watery. So I may take a spoon and just break up a few chickpeas on the side, and it'll thicken the sauce. Whereas, like in European cuisine or French cuisine, you're using thickener. We don't use any thickener.
Oh, like a cornstarch or something.
Yes. We never use that. We always just thicken it with either cooking it down or like mashing some of the beans on the side, and that'll thicken the sauce.
Yeah. During quarantine, when Simon's been home, and I've talked about him on the podcast, he's my 21-year-old. He loves spicy food, but I was making dal one night, and he came into the kitchen and he just like started grabbing my spices and just chucking everything in, because he's like, we need more flavor. And it came out so good. I made it with red lentils and lots of veggies, like those aromatics, the garlic, the ginger, the onion. And so it's fun. Like when you get kids in the kitchen with you can really start to play and experiment. And it gets me thinking, like, I am so curious what your life was like when you were a little girl hanging out in your mom's kitchen. Like, I'm assuming because, women typically, when we were both growing up, did most of the cooking. And I don't know what it was like in your house, but what was that mealtime like in your house? Were you helping your mom cook? Take us kind of behind the scenes. And what was it like when you were a kid?
My mom did all the cooking. So in India, you'll often hear people have servants or cooks. But in my house, the mothers did all the cooking, and the help would help with other things, but not in the actual cooking. And then when we came to US, I had to be more in the kitchen, even more so. But we would always be helpers, but not actual cooks. My mom pretty much owned her domain. But you just learn I always say you learn by osmosis. And that's how I picked up cooking. And in my house, meals were all about meals. Oh my gosh, my dad was into it. My mom was into it. And it was like, you didn't just sit down and eat, you talked about it. It's like, oh, the dal is so good. Oh, the sabji is so good. Oh, the roti is nice and soft. And I'm like, oh, I grew up like that. And all of us siblings talk like that. And so it's very weird for me when my husband just sits and eats and doesn't talk about it. I'm like, you just ate the whole food. Didn't talk at all about like how good it was.
That's so funny. Yeah, because I know maybe it's a dietitian thing too, but I know when I sit down, I'm all about the food and the meal. And even Simon gets so irritated with me because he walks in, he's been working all summer. He walks in and I immediately say, okay, in the fridge, I have one ripe mango. I have apples. I have berries. I have eggs. I have, and he's like, Mom, I have eyes. I can see what's in the fridge. I said, no, you don't understand. This is what mothers do. And my mother does it to me. She's 88 years old. I walk in her house immediately. There's tuna fish, tuna salad. There's this thing. It immediately tells you what's in the fridge. We're obsessed with food. But I love that when you were growing up at mealtime, you guys were just constantly talking about the different dishes that your mom had made and the kids had helped to make. I love that.
Yeah, meals were definitely the highlight of our day, I think.
Family mealtime.
Family mealtime.
I love family meals. I mean, I'm obsessed with family meals. That's kind of my shtick.
Me too.
It's my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were growing and when your boys were growing up, in Iowa there with you guys, like was mealtime, family mealtime a big priority for you as well?
Oh, absolutely. By the way, I have a daughter and a son.
Oh, a daughter and a son. I don't know why I thought you had two boys. Maybe because I have two boys. I made that assumption.
I have a daughter and a son. And yes, meal times were, both of them are, I think they just grew up with like very balanced meals. Sounds so snooty, but I grew up with balanced meals. We didn't just make dal or beans, and it was always beans and a vegetable and either a flatbread or rice. It was a combination of the meal. So I always like make that, and they know that, and they sort of like, well, where's the vegetable or where's the, they want that combination.
So let me talk everybody through this one other recipe because I did kind of tease it at the top of the show. And that is a recipe for pea and tofu curry. And I made it last night. Basically, you take extra firm tofu and you dry it out, squeeze the liquid out, and then you cut it into bite-sized pieces. So the recipe called for that, along with frozen peas, onion, ginger, and garlic. And then you called for a green chili, which I did not have, so I used cayenne pepper. You called for tomato sauce and cumin seeds. You called for almond meal and white poppy seeds. I did not have white poppy seeds. I actually used hemp seeds instead. Yeah, why not?
Interesting. Yeah, why not?
Turmeric and coriander and water, salt, garam masala, and then cilantro. And I happen to love cilantro. And interestingly, last night, Simon told me, my son, that he doesn't always love cilantro. He goes, sometimes it tastes funny to him. I'm like, I never knew this about you. He goes, sometimes I love it. Other times, it got that soapy taste to him. How could he go through 21 years of life? And I'm just hearing this now when we eat cilantro all the time. Isn't that weird? Anyway.
He's probably become more aware of individual spices.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe his palate's just getting more,
more advanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But exactly. I love this recipe because, you cook everything, the onions with those spices, and then you make your masala, you turn it into this kind of paste.
You got it.
Yes. And then it goes back in with the tofu and the peas and water and everything kind of bubbles and the flavors meld. And this is when I tasted it and thought, oh my gosh, it's too spicy. And then it went into the fridge, and then when I pulled it out and we heated it up for dinner and served it over rice, and that's when I was like, oh my gosh, she was right. Let this sit. Let those flavors meld. And it was just amazing to me how the flavor profile changed. It totally all blended together.
I'm glad it turned out, first of all. But so one thing I want to say so this is a vegan version of the dish you would eat in a restaurant called Matar Paneer. Matar is the peas, or peas and paneer. Paneer is Indian cheese. And so tofu, extra firm tofu, is a substitute for that paneer. And the reason I told you about letting it sit for a little while is that the water, the spices, all kind of just come together.
Right. That's right.
And then they also get into tofu. So now you have a more of a uniform flavor, and which is one good thing about Indian cuisine, makes great leftovers.
Totally agree.
Yeah. It's not like, oh my God, it's going to be bad. It's going to be yummy.
Yeah, it's going to be even better. Do you have a favorite dessert in the book?
My favorite dessert is jalebi, which I'm not going to talk about, but I need to talk about just because it's my favorite dessert. I have the recipe in the book, but it's like a funnel cake. And when I go to India, I have to have jalebi. Everybody knows. And they'll make it like fresh, and you swirl it around just like a funnel cake is great fresh, right? And then you dip it in syrup. But the recipe I want to talk about is almond halwa. I guess I couldn't resist talking about jalebi because Madhu and jalebi go hand in hand. So halwa.
Can you spell that?
Almond halwa, Halwa. It's on page 203.
Okay, halwa. Halwa, okay.
Halwa. You think of sesame halwa as a Middle Eastern.
Yes, I was thinking of halava, which I grew up eating halava, which is like a sesame dessert. Yeah.
Right. So I think that word probably came from Middle East to India, which I think happened way early, like in 12th century sometime. Anyway, so halwa is very, very popular in India. Indian desserts is something that's often made at home. It's also used as a communion, not the almond halwa, but halwa is. It can be made with cream of wheat, carrots. Oh my gosh, you go on and how many different ways you can make halwa. But cream of wheat, carrot is the most popular. So the almond halwa is your gluten-free version. You just roast, and the best part is you can buy almond meal now that's already ground.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
So you just roast your almond meal, and once it's fragrant and roasted, you add a syrup of sugar and water and cardamom powder. And you just put that syrup in within 10 minutes. It's ready, 5 to 7 minutes. You cook it, total of 15 minutes. But it's something that is very popular in Rajasthan, where my husband is from. And it's because it's all almonds. It's pretty rich, but it's delicious.
Ooh, I'm going to try that. What page is that on?
203.
Okay, 203. So for people who do not have your book, Madhu, because I do feel like this is sort of, even though it's a vegan cookbook, even if you're not a vegan, you're going to love this book, or you could always add a little fish or chicken here and there if you're, more of an omnivore. But for people who want to check out your book, where can they find it?
Well, Amazon, of course, has it. In a lot of the bookstores used to have it. But, of course, go to my website, cuisineofindia.com. You can also check out recipes on my blogs. And there's a lot of recipes in the blogs themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So people can check, and they can check out your cooking videos because you do such a great job explaining everything. And that, I think, when it comes to a cuisine we're not familiar with, I think the key really is just to have somebody show it to you and explain it to you. And then you're like, oh, I can do that. That's so easy. And then you get adventurous. And I think for all of us who want our families to try new things, and, now that we're home and a lot of kids are going to be, homeschooling again through the fall, it would be nice to get your kids in the kitchen, cooking with you, experimenting with you, and trying some of these new recipes. And just before we wrap it up on a final note, Madhu, if you're, someone listening to this podcast now and you've got your kiddos at home, what would be like that first recipe, when you gather your kids in the kitchen to help, just like when you were a little kid, but what would be like the best recipe from the book or your website that people can try first out of the gate?
First out of the gate, I would say I have a video on that. It's called potato flatbread. Okay. It's aloo paratha, potato flatbread. So it's flatbread that's stuffed with potatoes. And my grandson loves that. So I have to mention that. And all kids love Indian flatbreads. So you can make them in the oven. You can, of course, make them on the stove. But the aloo paratha is really easy. So
a couple of ideas, but I love the fact that you've got that YouTube video of that flatbread. So maybe we'll link to that. I've got show notes where I'm going to be sharing. And if it's okay with you, Madhu, if I can do some screenshots of some of the recipes we spoke about and then share those in the show notes so people can try them out.
Absolutely.
Good, good. This has just been so much fun. And I want to come to Ames, Iowa. I want to hang out with you. I want to cook with you. And I don't think I can do that right now, but I want to be there because you are like such a pro. It's just inspiring. Madhu, before we wrap it up, can you just tell everybody again where they can find you on the web?
My website is called cuisineofindia.com, all one word. And from there, you can link to my social media.
Excellent. We want to follow you on social as well. So you've got 2 kids. You've got a grandson. You are my go-to when it comes to all things Indian cuisine. And I can't thank you enough for demystifying it for me and for my listeners. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
This was great. This was great. I'm so happy I finally had you on the show. So you take care, be well, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you again, Liz. Take care.
And to all my listeners, the show notes will be action-packed. Be sure to head on over, check them out. If you try Madhu's recipes, let me know. Post a comment in the comment section of the show notes over on Liz'sHealthyTable.com. If you enjoy the show, tell a friend about it. Post a review on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.